So, Supply Chain 2030. 8 years away. What will it look like? One of the things that bears heavy on us is environmental impact. So today we're going to talk about eco-labeling and the goal of the consumer and the goal of your downstream trading partner. We do not have transparency in the supply chain. The goal of most consumers is to be able to scan a label and not only know the price and the ingredient line, but also to know the impact on the environment. And we're going to talk about where we are and where we could be and what the barriers are. This is not easy, right? The state of the supply chain is we have beautiful, they're gorgeous corporate social responsibility documents, ESG groups. They sit in finance. 70% of people make claims about ESG, recyclable, organic, fair labor. But only 20% of people actually take responsibility for the impact in their network. And when we get to scope 3 emissions, greenhouse gases, we've got to take responsibility for that network, right? And you remember I showed you supply visibility, I showed you logistics visibility and the huge gaps. We have big issues getting there. So let's talk about the maturity cycle. Usually when people start on the journey for environmental impact, there's this discussion of operations and corporate, and the talk is about goals. And the first step people have, they feel really good about because it's all about reducing waste. Operations loves to reduce waste, ties in with the ESG goals. But what happens when it no longer aligns? What happens when a fair labor issue is not the lowest cost? What happens when we have to make a lot of volume and we have issues with water, like what is happening in Taiwan with the lack of water for TSMC? What happens when the Rhine River loses 30% of volume and I can no longer get barges down the river for BASF, right? So when those goals no longer align, organizations struggle and they don't have good answers. But we have investment groups that want to invest in companies that are socially responsible. And what is happening is many companies, 2/3 of public companies, are investing in carbon offsets. Carbon offsets are well intended, but we don't have enough land to plant all the trees that we're supposedly using in carbon offsets. So I saw this video from John Oliver that I cut just a little bit of that I want to just run for us now. If we could run the John Oliver video. Are we ready to run the John Oliver video back there? Because I think it puts it into perspective.
Our main story tonight concerns Earth. It's basically the Oscar Isaac of planets in that it seems to be getting alarmingly hotter every year. It's pretty clear this planet is not doing great. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is now higher than ever in human history. And a recent UN Commission climate report was called An Atlas of Human Suffering, which coincidentally is also the slogan for Craigslist. Luckily though, one group is here to fix it: giant corporations. Many are now claiming that they've hit upon a solution, becoming carbon neutral or net zero, basically running their businesses in such a way that they don't increase the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. As of last year, 1 in 5 of the world's 2,000 largest publicly listed companies have now committed to a net zero emissions target, which sounds great. You might even have seen them bragging about their claims in ads like this one from United Airlines, this one from Apple, this one from Shell, and this one from an unexpected source.
KitKat is committing to becoming carbon neutral by 2025, reducing emissions by 50% through forest regeneration. planting 5 million shade trees, supporting regenerative farming, and securing 100% renewable electricity for our factories worldwide. And will offset any remaining carbon by investing in climate projects. Let's give the planet a break.
Yeah, even Kit Kat is getting involved, which is a strange sales technique. It's not like you decide to eat a Kit Kat bar because of their net zero targets. You decide to eat one because you're at rock bottom and you've run out of Reese's peanut butter cups. That's why you do it. Now, as for the shovel made out of a Kit Kat, that seemed less like a sustainable farming tool and more like what you'd use to bury the body of the red M&M. But the key phrasing comes at the end there, that they'd offset any remaining carbon. That's actually a common tactic. In fact, one study that looked closely at the net zero promises of dozens of companies in heavily polluting industries found that 2/3 of them are relying on offsets instead of emissions reductions. Offsets are wildly popular.
So let's just think about that. 2/3 of companies are focused on offsets versus the reduction of emissions. And there is no auditing or jurisdiction or governance around 170 different exchanges across 100 countries to really govern this. So while we may say that we're trying to achieve net zero, I ask myself the question, are we playing a shell game? Just like when we thought we were improving cash to cash, but cash to cash is a compound metric, receivables plus inventory, oh my gosh, we haven't done well in inventory, so let's extend payables, right? Let's make them 90, let's make them 120, let's make them 180, and that way we have better cash to cash. But as you've seen, we don't really have good network visibility or network sensing for parties in the supply chain. In fact, only 1/3 of companies know who their second and third tier suppliers are. So a lot of times people say, well, we can audit our way out of this. No, I don't think so. There is no transparency in auditing. So this whole concept of network visibility and investing in networks and thinking hard about emissions is work we need to do. And it's work we need to do across the company. And I showed you the alignment issues we have. Where are most of our greenhouse gases coming from? Transportation, which is not aligned with sourcing and manufacturing. Manufacturing, which is not aligned with procurement and transportation. We need to do the hard work. We can't just rely on carbon offsets. And we need to do the hard work so that we can move to consumer transparency. And that requires adoption of standards, that requires adoption of networks, and that means we have to build outside-in processes that sense. And we're a long ways away from that reality. So as we think about this, we've got to think about how do we do the hard work? What are our emissions? Greenhouse gas directly from a business? Yep, I can have corporate offices that are greener. I can have warehouses that are greener. I can have manufacturing plants that are greener. I can be very, very careful about what I buy for power and electricity, and I can track that. But look at Scope 3 emissions, which is the discussion that is being had right now in government for climate change. Accounting for upstream and downstream emissions from products or services across the supply chain. Can I see a paddle, a green paddle, if anybody thinks that they know the answer to that? You got a green paddle for me, Alma? Okay, let's give Alma the mic. Christine, give her the mic. Let's hear what the answer is.
I was eating my snack.
I'm sorry?
I was eating a snack, so go
Okay.
ahead.
What do you think the answer is?
The answer to what? Sorry, Laura, to what specifically?
Okay, do you have an answer for how we reduce Scope 3 emissions?
Well, this is something that we're struggling with, to be honest. So, looking at the carbon offsets, that's kind of the easier way to go, to your point.
It's easier, but is it effective? Yeah.
But is it effective? That's the question, right? And even that, I'm worried that we're not doing enough. Not even the carbon offsets, right? So I think we're so early in our journey that we're going to have to take all the help we can get, to move there. And we do have manufacturing facilities, so we're definitely number one. The emissions and from the energy we purchase, and then we also have lots of inbound and outbound in the supply chain with transportation and all kinds of means of transport: the air, the truck, the ocean. So once you start thinking about it, it becomes overwhelming, and it's where do we start and how do we eat this elephant?
Well, I think we start with design. So, Madhav, we start with design. What do you think? We start with measurement, we start with design, and we need careful choice about routes and lanes and electric vehicles and what we run in manufacturing. And pass the mic to Madhav. Madhav, how are we doing on design?
So, Laura, a couple of things here, right? One is, recently I was reading an article where they were talking about, as the recessionary pressures increase, CFOs are looking at two areas where they want to cut down spending. One is M&A. Second one on the list is ESG-related projects and initiatives. Exactly at the time when the regulators are tightening, right? If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, this whole environmental justice is a big thing. So from a supply chain design standpoint, we look at it as not either or kind of option. Can we do both?
And so how many of your clients are actually designing for Scope 3 emission reduction?
Very few, if that.
Okay. Okay, now that's a statement, right?
Yeah.
2/3 of companies are investing in carbon offsets. Coupa, one of the leading providers in network design technology, very few are designing their supply chains. So we need to start with design. We need to think about routes. We need to think about empty vehicles. We need to think about how do we make things more effectively. We need to think about landfills. And I had no idea until my speaker canceled and I ended up filling in for my speaker who couldn't make it due to a personal commitment, that we're the 30th anniversary of eco-labeling. Does anybody here have an eco-label on their package? 30th anniversary. So this is the eco-label. It is primarily used in Europe. And there's also the Blue Angel label that is used in Germany. And this doesn't hold for food products, but it really looks at all of these elements, but it is based upon audits. Does anyone think an audit is effective? Or self-reported data? I mean, it's kind of like asking me my weight. Do you think I'm going to be honest about my weight? I think we're kidding ourselves, right? Do you know there are 31 different eco-labels around the world? 31. Think about the complexity of 31 eco-labels. Now, if my goal is to scan a label anywhere in the world for the same package and know the impact on the planet, I need consolidation and some kind of an effort through leadership, like we saw with Danny Wegman and Sandy Douglas and the Smuckers, to give us a standard that can go around the world. So everyone that is working with GS1 or the committees, we need to get at this because 31 is just complexity. Can you imagine having 31 different labels on a package? And then it changes, and then, you've got to keep up with them. So 10/13/2022 is Global Eco-Labeling Day, right? I never knew that. We're going to celebrate 30 years of global eco-labeling, but I don't have any clients that are really focused on this as an initiative. I don't have any clients that really even know this, right? Most of this work is regional work. And so if we think about how do we have a product scanned by 2030 to be able to drive transparency for the customer, we're a long way away. So how do we get there? Is voluntary governance better than governmental oversight? That is the question that is in the industry. And in my experience of 20 years of an analyst, I have not seen government oversight be effective, and I've not seen voluntary governance be effective. What I have seen is leadership from companies to be effective. And so when we think about meeting our goals, when you hear carbon offset, you should raise a red flag. When you hear corporate social responsibility, you need to help to pave the path of what that is, measure it, design it, be accountable for it, put some teeth behind it. Don't just do math to meet the objectives. Because we're headed into an ugly period of forced oversight on Scope 3 emissions without clear standards. And, today and tomorrow we're going to have the North American Manufacturing Association has representatives in the room. They're a lobbying organization. We also have the Journal of Commerce that'll be with us tomorrow. We need to be able to get some balance here because I don't think either government oversight or voluntary governance is going to work. I really think it comes down to leadership, and it comes down to designing the supply chain and improving networks and visibility. So let me tell you a story. I used to work for a company called AMR Research. Many people don't even know that anymore, but it was an analyst group out of Boston. And I focused on networks and moving data through networks. And when I started my own company, I had this vision of the network of networks would allow interoperability across companies and seamless visibility. And I had, a hairy, audacious goal that I could get Ariba to interoperate with eDopen and eDopen to interoperate with Elimica. And I'm convinced that that will never happen. But we're in the middle of an internet evolution where in my early days we had the static web. Then we had the dynamic web, which we're currently working with right now, which is YouTube and social media. And we have the concepts around Web 3.0. And the Web 3.0 is all about the democratization of data, blockchain, cryptocurrency. And you might say, well, wow, that's way out there for supply chain folks. Yeah, it probably is. But my question is, can the insights and the research from Web 3.0 and social tokens and NFTs blaze a trail that we could make our current techniques for networks and visibility obsolete? Can we learn from the much younger generation about how we could embrace new technologies to solve big, hairy problems on visibility and corporate social responsibility in new ways if we can change our paradigm to not just think about closed networks, or self-serving networks, or networks that pass point to point, or a paradigm of integration. So I was looking for a speaker to talk about Web 3.0 and some of the work that's happening here, because it's new, right? And blockchain has not proven to be really scalable for some of the supply chain questions we have. In fact, our next speaker at the Network of Networks is Bayer, that's worked in the pharmaceutical industry on blockchain and some of the things that they've learned. And we also have a lot of issues around transparency and standardization and what's off-chain, what's on-chain, how do we manage it. So it's a long way off. There's no easy answer. But can we learn from what's happening in Web 3.0 and also what's happening with NFTs to think about this differently? And so an NFT is a non-fungible token. And I want to just play a short definitional video just so that we're all on the same wavelength for our next presenter. Can you roll the video?
NFT stands for non-fungible token. Non-fungible means that something cannot be exchanged for another item because it is unique. For instance, one piece of art is not equal to another. Both have unique properties. Fungible items, on the other hand, can be exchanged for one another. For instance, $1 or Bitcoin is always equal to another. Okay, but what is an NFT? NFTs are tokens that live on a blockchain and represent ownership of unique items. Why is that helpful? Well, tracking who owns a digital file is tricky because it can be copied and distributed effortlessly. So how can you prove who's the original owner when everyone has an identical copy of the file? NFTs solve this problem. Imagine that you made a piece of digital art, essentially a JPEG on your computer. You can create or mint an NFT out of this. The NFT that represents your art contains a bit of information about it, such as a unique fingerprint of the file, a token name, and a symbol. This token is then stored onto a blockchain and you, the artist, become the owner. Now you can sell that token by creating a transaction on the blockchain. The blockchain makes sure that this information can never be tampered with. It also allows you to track who is the current owner of a token and for how much it has been sold in the past. It's important to note that the artwork itself is not stored within the NFT or the blockchain, only its attributes.
So I cut this just to give you a snippet of what's happening in the Web 3.0 cryptocurrency world. And what we think is far out, a new generation is very, very excited about.